So for today's session, we have a topic of A to Z of REST APIs. So for today's agenda, we have like what is REST API, what is RESTful web services, and what is meant by like representational state, what is meant by resources, and the architecture style. Then what are the guidelines which needs to be followed for, to when we are trying to develop a REST APIs, and what is URI, and then most important thing of this session is this HTTP methods, when to use get, post, put, patch, and delete, and then what are HTTP status codes, and then path parameter, query parameter, and then when we have large data set, how we can effectively use filtering and pagination, and last but not the least, what is meant by synchronous versus asynchronous APIs. So, what is REST API? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. An API means Application Programming Interface, and the REST was first coined by Roy Fielding in 2000, and it is a style of software architecture for distributed systems like our internet, which is World Wide Web. Okay, REST is web-based standard architecture, and it uses our underlying HTTP protocol also. The real motivation behind the REST is that to basically use the characteristics of internet, which made this World Wide Web very successful. So, what are those characteristics? First is that URI addressable resources. That I mean, everything can be accessed with unique identifier, which we called URI, or sometimes it is also called as URL, Uniform Resource Locator, or in REST context, it is called as, also called as path. Second is HTTP protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and the third one is make request, receive response, and display response. That what does it mean? That whenever client makes a request to a server gives a response. If let's say there is the resource exists, then server gives that resource to a client, and the client displays it. Otherwise it shows that the requested resource cannot be found. Then let's say what is REST API. So let's say client wants to you know uh, request some data to server. So over here we follow request response paradigm. So request response paradigm works in a way like, let's say client wants some data or some resources from the server. So basically client makes a request, and if server has that data or that resource which client is asking, it would return that resource in the response. And in REST API, it is not always a client server architecture only. There is a possibility that server to server communication also possible. Like let's say one API calls, let's say, some other API to fetch other details or other resources. So server to server communication is also possible. Then what is RESTful web services? So RESTful web services are basically the web services which are based on REST architecture, and you know ba- uh, uh, the REST based architecture, everything is in it is treated as resource. So I mean, and the REST web services are very light in nature, because as compared to SOAP, these are very, very light in nature because we don't have compulsory headers and all. So it is very light in nature, and because of that it is very highly scalable, and it is commonly used to create APIs for our web-based applications. Since web services are very lightweight, so it is because of that it is very fast, because less number of data transfers need to be done as compared to SOAP. So over here, I mean, we have certain types of headers and all, which makes a very heavy weight. In case of SOAP, we have certain parameters and all, like we have to compulsorily pass headers in that request payload. So the SOAP based architecture, the API becomes unnecessary, cluttered with those parameters. But in REST it is not required, so it consumes less bandwidth and resources. And REST can be written in any commonly used programming language like Java, Python, Go, and it can be hosted on any platform. So there is no restriction like REST should be developed in this language or that language. I mean, it can be developed in any language. So it depends on what your needs or what our organization needs are. So based on that, language can be chosen. So what is resource? So I mean, in REST based architecture, everything is treated as resource. So everything means audios, videos, images, text files, HTML pages, all things are in the REST context, it is treated as resource. So, so basically, REST server provides access to resource with the help of URIs. URIs are, uniform resource identifier. So each resource will have, a unique URI. It would not be possible like, two resource have same URI. And then REST uses various representations, like it can be a JSON or XML or text, but most commonly used is a JSON format. In industry, we heavily use JSON format, but some legacy system also use XML format also for transfer the data. But most heavily used is JSON. JSON is JavaScript or object notation, and XML is extensible markup language. So all, I mean, if you see some legacy system, there is a chance that the request response is done in XML format. So what is resource? Let's say each layer is going to have a different representation. So I mean, let's say we have a customer data, which was like it would consist of like customer ID, name, date of birth, address, and all, I mean, all the necessary attributes which require for our customer data. So it would have like it may be placed in, let's say, search DB. I mean, to return the results faster. And in the primary DB maybe Oracle, and in the caching layer. So I mean, in each of these places, I mean, the data would not be kept in the same format. In search DB, it may be kept in JSON format. In primary DB like Oracle, it may be kept in tuple format like row wise. Okay. And in caching layer, not all the attributes may be required. Let's say only few attributes required, like name, ID, and all. So only those part of that subset of that resource is kept in the caching layer. So basically, in each layer we have I mean, data about a same resource, but the representation is different. So in case of search DB, maybe JSON format. In primary DB, let's say our primary DB also is a NoSQL, then there is a chance of that our resource is also in primary DB is also stored in JSON format also. So I mean, it depends on your underlying implementation. So what is representational state? So let's say a client makes a request to a server, and server you know uh, gives a response, like let's say it would basically fetch that resource from a DB, and it would give a response. So it's like uh, server has those details stored in DB. So it may be possible that, I mean, those are stored in some tuple or JSON format. But at client side, we would not display that resource or that information in that format. We might have some nice UI and display only a subset of information like name, address, and all. So each layer have a different representation, but I mean, the data is same. I mean, we are talking about the data. So for that data, let's say for customer ID one, the data, I mean the way we store the data, but ultimately it is talking about the same resource. So let's say, I mean, the resource is let's say resource is id 111, and the name is Arshad, state is Maharashtra, and country is India. Okay. So from the db, it we transfer that to ui via network layer. Okay. So in network layer, let's say we are passing this information in JSON format, and in UI we are displaying like only few subset of like ID is not displayed. I mean, it's not required, right? Let's say if you want to view your profile in, let's say, some social media site like LinkedIn or so, internally it has ID. I mean, everything we should have a primary key, but that ID is not displayed in on your UI. Only subset of information is displayed. So all these three layers, resource, network layer, and UI, all three are talking about ID1 with name Arshad. But as you can see, the DB layer, let's say the resource is in raw format, but at network layer it is in JSON format, but in UI it is displayed in some other format. So I mean, it is basically ultimately talking about the same thing, same resource only with ID 111, but the way we display information is different. So let's say if the state of that resource is changed to, let's say, Karnataka. Okay. So each layer would depict the same. So basically, whenever a new request come for this resource, so ideally it should return the updated data to client. So let's say whenever a new request come after update, so it would basically transfer those details to network layer, and basically network layer would transfer those details again to UI. So as we can see, the updated data is transferred across each layer. Yeah. So what is REST? Basically, REST is used to manage the resource. Managing is like creating the resource, updating or deleting the resource. And representation of these resources, like pass representation state from one layer to another layer. So it's like, as we saw in our previous example, we are passing we are passing the representation, like the data is same, but the way we display the information is different. What is representation? So representation is basically like how the data is represented or how the data is presented to client. Okay. And there are basically two main formats which we have in our REST API. So basically, first is like JSON, which is, I mean, JavaScript object notation, and XML is extensible markup language. And as I earlier said, that among these two, the JSON is most preferred in today's industry. But I mean, if you have a legacy system, then there is a chance that you might have XML format API. And it is very common to have multiple representation, because I mean, let's say the server has a resource, let's say about a customer data, but there is a chance that client which is making a request wants, one client wants the data in XML format, other client wants data in JSON format. So always we should have, while we are developing a distributed system, we should have that flexibility. I mean, if a client asks for JSON, we should return the JSON format data, and if if client asks for XML data, it should basically give XML data. So both requests should be served by server to client. So what is REST? I mean, architecture style. So it is like over here, like as you can see that there are multiple clients. So there are three clients basically. Let's say client one, client two, and client three. Okay. Client one is making HTTP GET request on URL one. Basically, web server does the processing, and if it has that resource, then it would give in response that resource XML document, because client required that in XML format, so we have written that in XML doc. Okay. Let's say client 2 wants to create a resource. So the client is using HTTP post request. So basically, web server would create the resource and give a response that that resource is basically created on the server. And let's say client 3 again makes a request of like deleting the resource. So basically it would use HTTP delete method, and it would be like, let's say the response might be like, after deleting, the response might be like web server says that this resource is deleted successfully, so might be a text doc format. So I mean, all these formats like XML, JSON, and text, all these are supported by REST APIs. But I mean, it depends on your implementation. I mean, if we support only one JSON, let's say only JSON format, and let's say if any client wants to request the resource and it wants XML format, so we would get an error like the server would throw an error like the request format is not supported and all. Okay, so what are so while creating REST API, what guidelines which needs to be followed? First is client server. So first, it is very clear that it works in client server architecture fashion. So client is the one which requests for the data or the resource, and the server is basically serves the request, and it is transferring the states of the data to the client. Okay. Second is cacheable. So within whatever agreed contract between the server and the client, it I mean, it might be a possible that certain requests might be cacheable. Like let's say, in case of social media, let's say some viral post is going on. So it's better to kept that viral post in cache, and whenever any client requests for that resource, server would return that resource from that cache only, right? I mean, it would not go and fetch the details from the DB. So I mean, the response time would be huge if every request is served from DB, and there is a chance that our application might crash. Okay. And third is layered. So layered is like, again, means that when the REST APIs are enabling two components to communicate with each other. So I mean, as I in earlier slides, we have seen that there is a chance of client to server communication, and also there is a chance of server to server communication. So I mean, when client makes a request to a server, it only client knows about the server one. And let's say if server internally calls some other server or some other API, I mean, client is not aware of those internal implementation. So basically, it is client is only aware of the server, and the third layer is hidden from client, and vice versa. So over here, like client knows about the server which is serving the list of, let's say, customer API, but maybe that server is talking to some other data source or some other service which is actually fetching the list of customers to the server. But client which is requesting to that server would not know about third component. Like as I already said, I mean, let's say client makes a request to server, and server internally calls other API which basically fetches all the details of customer. So like server 1 would call, let's say, API 2, and API 2 would respond to server 1, and the server 1 basically respond to that client. So it's like, I mean, the the second API is hidden from client directly. So it accesses the customer's data via server 1. Then fourth is stateless. Now it is very important, one of the most important guidelines of REST API. So stateless means one server will get request from multiple clients, and one server will get request from same client also multiple times. I mean, so let's say, if let's take example of social media post, and one of the tweet or one of the post is going viral. So I mean, there is a chance that multiple users are trying to access that same resource. I mean, it's possible. And then there is a chance that the same client, like let's say I am trying to view that content again and again, so there is a multiple request I am doing for the same resource. So there is a chance of multiple customers accessing the same resource, and there is also a chance of same customer accessing that resource multiple times. So let's understand this example. Like this is, I mean, and always like it stateless means like let's say client and server does not know state of each other. So whenever a request comes to server, it would check whether all the parameters are there or not, and if it fulfills those requirements, then it would serve those requests. Then fifth is uniform interface. Okay. Uniform interface just defines that whenever any data is being requested or modified by a client to the server, the interface to do should be always uniform. I mean, let's say if you want to access a customer data, so you would use, you would use get method to basically get that data. But if you want to delete that resource, then you would use delete method, but the API endpoint would remain same. Only depending on the functionality, the HTTP methods would change. Then six is code on demand. So it is an optional one. In this, the server can send a code to a client that it should execute. For example, JavaScripts. Like there are some JavaScript which we would get from server. So at runtime, the client should run those scripts. So this is an optional one, not compulsory one. So this was most theory section. We would go more deep into it, like in a implementation point of view. So let's say what is URI. So basically it stands for uniform resource identifier, and in some cases it is also known as URL, uniform resource locator, or API endpoints or path. So it is basically used to uniquely identify the resources in our system. So as you can see over here, my URI or API endpoint, it looks like something this. So HTTPS, my store is DNS, and customer is a resource. As I already said, that everything is treated as resource. So customer slash triple one. So it says that get the customer resource which has ID triple one. So it would point to this record, like ID triple one, then name, Arshad, state, and all. So so this is like you give a resource name and then slash ID to point to specific resource. Okay. Yeah. So as what are these HTTP methods? So basically, so first is get. Basically, it provides a read-only access to the resource. Second is post. It is used to create a new resource. So let's say if you want to create a new resource, then we should use post method. And delete is basically you if we want to delete or remove a resource from a server, then we should use delete method. And put is used to update an existing resource, but in some cases it is also used for creating a resource. It is called as an upsert operation. We will see in that in further slides. So and the patch is also used for updating the existing resource. And what is difference between put and patch? It's like we will see in further parts of this session. So let's say if you want to access anything, you should always use get. If you want to create something, then you should use post. And if you want to delete, then always you should use delete. And put or patch can be used depending on your requirements. So let's say if you want to update whole resource, then we should always use put operation. And if let's say if you want to update only so few attributes, then we should use patch. We will see the implementation. So what are HTTP status codes? So there are broadly categorized into these five status codes. Like 1xx means informational, 2xx means success, So if let's say server responds with 2xxx, means it's a successful, the request has been served. So 200, http status goes 200 means the okay, 201 means that your request, resources has been created, and 3xx means that redirection, and the 4xx means client side error. I mean, let's say if we want to access some resource, and let's say our request payload or URL is not correct, then server would throw 400, that is bad request. And 5xx means there is something wrong happen at server side. So these are very important, because I mean, depending on whatever, if we have a success scenario, then we should always send 2xx response from server. And if let's say there is a, issue with the client side data or client side, we should always send 4xx to basically, indicate that this is a client side issue. And if there is, anything, if there is anything at server side, we would use 5xx. So this is our project. So if, in this I have used Spring Boot to create our API endpoints, and then there is controller, then DAO layer, basically data access object layer, then exceptions, like let's say if customer is found or not, and if it is not found, we should always, throw a custom defined exceptions, not a generic exceptions. Then there is a models, then service, what are, customer service, order service. So let's go into ecom controller. Okay. Yeah. It's, I mean, for controller we always give a rest, at the rate rest controller annotation. And these are like auto add annotations, basically to, create an object of customer service and all. So these are like annotations in Spring Boot. Our work starts here. So let's say, if we want to fetch all the customers, then we should always use http get method. Okay. And the path to access all customer is slash customer. Okay. And let's say if you want to view only specific customer, let's say customer with ID 1, so the path would look like slash customer slash 1. So customer ID 1 would be fetched. Re- Request method over here is also a get method. Okay. And let's say if we want to, create a customer, then path is same, slash customer. But I mean, it's like we use a post method in this case. Update customer means, let's say if we want to update some attributes of that customer, then as you can see that the interface is same, like slash customer slash customer slash customer. But depending on the functionality, we are getting getting, we are using different http methods. So let's say if we want to fetch any resource, we use http get method. If we want to create a resource, we are using http post method. And if we want to update the resource, we are using http put method. And over here, as you can see, consumes, because to create and to update, we require some, some data from client, what needs to be created. So as you can see, our API accepts only application JSON. So only if let's say JSON format is only accepted in this case. And the request body should follow this customer model. Okay. So these are like, it should have ID, name, email, phone, state, country and all. Okay.
Uh, so, is there some sort of an automated mechanism by which you can only get for one customer? So, for example, you said slash customer slash one will give us customer with customer ID 1.
Yeah.
So, what will happen if somebody were to pass like no value at all?
So if they do not pass, then it would basically fetch all the customers.
Oh, so automatically there is no restriction. So we will have to write a restriction that if the
No,
parameter is
no. If let's say if I mean in a real world, I mean let's say we don't want to display all the customers, right?
right.
So this API endpoint would not exist. And if let's say customer does not provide, let's say it if let's say it wants to access on let's say customer ID one and ID is not provided, then it would check whether slash customer only slash customer exists, but slash customer does not exist, so it would throw server would throw error like this method is not allowed or this API does not exist, something like that.
Got it.
Okay.
And so that means also we have to definitely make sure that whatever formats we want to encourage, be it JSON or XML, they have to be definitely stated here. Otherwise,
Yeah. So it is in software industry, this term is known as contract. So
okay.
contract means let's say if you want to develop some API, so you give a contract like I would accept, I mean this is my API endpoint and I would accept the data in this format only. And
Mm,
if let's say client if anyone wants to access our resources or access our API, it should follow that request model. So let's say if over here, as you can see, we accept in this format, and let's say instead of ID, let's say some ID, I mean key value is like let me go through this. So let's say instead of name, let's say if someone types like this names, it would throw an error. I mean, because the contract itself says that what are request parameters we which we accept. Okay. And I mean, for creating resource we would require certain data from client, so we say at the rate request body, and whatever the format we require, basically this is also called as model based. So and for update also, what needs to be updated, I mean obviously customer needs to be updated, so that the data should be in customer data only, right? And let's say, yeah, so these are like put. Okay. And patch is like only, let's say we want to update only certain parts of that customer. And then let's say for delete customer, as you can see, for get customer, particular customer, we use same API endpoint like slash customer slash customer ID. And for delete also we are using same API endpoint, because to point to a specific resource we have this unique URI. So if you want to access that resource, then use get. If you want to delete that resource, then use delete method. Okay. So this is meant when we saw that uniform identifiers. So these are like it's, I mean the API endpoints are same, depending on the functionality we use the required HTTP methods. Okay. And so this is, I mean a basic. We will go deep into this once we explore each HTTP method in detail. So let's go back to our slides. Okay. Just one sec. Yeah. So what is path parameter and query parameter? So as we saw over here, like this curly braces, these are called path parameters. I mean, these are variable parameters. Like if we want to access customer with customer ID one, so we would give slash customer slash one. If we want to access customer ID two, then slash customer slash two. Okay. So this is called path parameter because it is in that URI path only. So this my store is DNS, and customer is over here is resource name, and this triple one is ID of that resource. It is also called as path parameter. Okay. Yeah. So and let's say if the API endpoint is like slash customer slash 222, So basically it would point to a resource with id 222. So I mean slash customer slash one would point to customer one, slash customer slash 222 would point to 222, and so on. So I mean each customer would have a unique id, and to access that unique customer we need an api endpoint. So let's say if customer has, I mean, orders cannot exist without customer, right? So orders are called as sub resources of customer. And let's say if customer does not exist, then order would also be would not exist. So let's say if we want to, basically fetch all the orders of customer one, so we would our API would look like something this, like slash customer slash one slash orders. Okay, so basically it would fetch all the orders of customer one. And let's say if you want to fetch, let's say for customer two, then our api would look like something, customer slash two slash orders. Okay. Mhm. And let's say, I mean, if we want to view all the customers, then as I already said, that slash customer is and the http method would be get to view all the customers. So let's say, so these are like, I mean, a few api endpoints. So what is query parameter? As we said that, I mean, if we want to fetch all the customer, we would basically use slash customers, and http method would be get, so it would display all the customers. But let's say, I mean, we don't want to view all the customers, we want to view only customers which are staying in Maharashtra. Okay. So here comes query parameter. Query parameter format looks like this. I mean, slash customer is common, and then question mark state equal to Maharashtra. So it would fetch all the customers which has state Maharashtra. So let's say in this case customer ID 111 and 222 has state Maharashtra. So it would fetch all the customers which are staying in Maharashtra. So yeah, now our main part starts from here. So from here we would see all the HTTP methods in detail. So first method is HTTP post. So HTTP post method is basically used to create a resource, and the resource details are expected in request body. Okay. So as you can see, we have many components in this. So first is URI, right? URI, or we also called as API endpoint or URL some cases. So as you can see, HTTP method is post. Our URI is localhost, because I am running on my local computer. So localhost 8080, port number is 8080, and HTTP is a protocol, and slash customer is our resource. Okay. And the request payload looks like something this. Name is Arshad, then all the details. Why we have not provided an ID? Because we want a unique ID, and it is a responsibility of server to basically give the ID in the response. Okay. So the main component is like URI, then the request payload, and let's say all the information is correct. Okay. So the server would respond with HTTP status code 200, which is okay. And ID for this resource is ID1. The server has assigned a resource with ID1, so it can be it is a customer ID. Okay. And the status code is 200. And what was the resource? This customer resource, ID1, name, whatever we have provided and all. Okay. So in this way we would create a resource. There is one more component, which is headers. So it is like a metadata of any API. So as we saw, uh, uh, content type is application JSON, means API serves or API accept only JSON, JSON request and all. And then there are others also, like content length, then user agent, accept encoding, then connection and all. So these are like few headers. The most important is this content type. As we saw, in our over here, that whenever we are basically accepting any data from client, so we define this by this consumes notation, that media type is application JSON. And if you see, there are other formats also, like UTF format, application JSON and all. Okay. Yeah. So in our previous example, we saw that whole resource body was given in response again. But there is another way also, like let's say, if customer wants to register itself, or we want to create a customer. So server would respond with status code 201, that the resource has been created, and only ID and code is given in response, but not the whole request body, because I mean, client only itself send those details, right? So sometimes it is I mean, it is not required to send the whole resource which has been created like this. I mean, we don't require I mean, in some cases we may require the whole resource body, but in many cases, I mean, we follow this type of style, like only that ID of that resource is returned, and and the status code will be 201, that which indicates that our resource has been created. Okay. Yeah. I mean, since this is client, that this data input data is given by, or a request payload is given by client, so there is a chance that the client has made some mistake, or or some bad or malicious actor, I mean, trying to break our system, and they are intentionally providing some false information, some incorrect information. So always we have some implementations at our end, at service layer, at UI or front end layer. So basically, let's say email ID, let's say email ID is there, you know and let's say email ID we give like arshad1.com, but it is not following our proper email validation. So a server would return like email ID is invalid and all, and the status code would be like 400 bad request. Okay. uh, Invalid email ID, and since ID is not created, so ID is null, and the code is 400. That means client said there is some issue, that client has not provided with a proper information. Okay. Yeah. But let's say, if client correct those, and client correct those details, and let's say if we want to create a new resource, then basically it can do that. But let's say, our yeah, what we can say, our system create a resource based on email IDs. Okay. So let's say we had already created for this email ID, like sachin2 at the gmail.com. Okay. And let's say client again fires this HTTP post request with the same data. So basically it should not override existing data, like, right? I mean, our implementation or server should give a conflict response, like customer ID already exists, and the HTTP status code will be 409, which is conflict, which indicates that the resource is already exists in our system, and it is this email ID is not allowed to use. I mean, the client should provide with new email ID. And there is also a chance, like let's say if you want to process something, so I mean, there are few APIs which are which doesn't give any response payload, right? I mean, let's say we want to process some customer, so I mean the status. So how would a client know that whether his request is accepted or not? Because we are the server is not giving any response payload, right? Server is not giving any response payload. So status code for that would be 204, that is no content. So whenever client gets this 204 no content, means that his client's request is accepted by server, and it is ready to be processed. Okay. Okay, then what are these HTTP status codes? So 200 OK means the resource is created along with resource details in response, and 201 created means the resource is created, but not all the resource details would be written in response. Only the ID is returned. 204 is no content, like the resource is accepted by server and it is processed successfully, but there are no contents which needs to be returned to client. And then 400 bad request means client side there is some issue in the request payload, and conflict means there is duplicate or conflict resource, like in this case we saw that that email ID already exists, so the server sent 409 conflict response. Okay. Okay, so let's go now. Yeah, so let's say we want to create a resource. Okay. Yeah, so let's say we want to create a customer. Okay. Okay, the ID is assigned one. I hope you can see the postman I have opened. So yeah, as we can see, our ID one is created with these details, and let's say joy at the rate. Okay, let's say we are creating another customer. So again, it is created, but let's say if we provide a wrong email ID, then invalid email ID, like because client should also know which is what is wrong with his payload. So HTTP status code is 400 bad request, and the error message over here is that invalid email ID. But let's say if a client corrects it and again sends it, because we had already created this joy@gmail.com ID, so it says that customer ID already exists, and the HTTP status code for that is 402 conflict response. Okay. And let's say we want to create an order. So for customer, let's say for customer ID 1, we want to create one order. Let's say item is like laptop phone, quantity 1, and the price is, let's say, 50,000 and all, and this is shipping address. I mean, so let's say we have created, so the ID is, which is order ID is 1001, and as you can see, all the details are over here are populated. The total amount is this. So this is a sub resource, because let's say, I mean, we want to create an order for customer ID 1. So if let's say customer ID 1 does not exist, then the order also would not exist. So this is order is known as sub resource of customer 1. So if we want to let's say some, maybe want to add some more, like chair, let's say, and some 500 quantity, and let's say we want to create another. So as we can see that next order ID is created with these details. Okay, 500 was price of that, and the quantity is 1, so total amount is 500. But let's say we want to place a three units, so total amount is 1500. The price is 500, but quantity is 3. Okay, and the customer ID is 1, because customer 1 has placed that order. Okay, so let's go over here, like yeah, so let's go more about other API endpoints which we have. So update customer, yeah, delete customer is there. But let's say we if we want to get order for that customer, then the API endpoint would be /customer/customer ID. So here, over here, customer ID is path parameter. So let's say if we want to access order for customer 1, then one is would be given as path parameter. And for if you want to access for customer ID, let's say 100, so API would be like slash customer slash 100 slash orders. So for all the orders which are created by customer 100 would be returned. And let's say if we want to view only one order ID, let's say order ID, let's say 1000 for customer ID 1. So customer ID, the API endpoint would be like slash customer slash 1 slash order slash order ID. So these are like, in this API we have two path parameters. First is customer ID and second is order ID. So as you can see, path variable is customer ID first, and the second is order ID. Okay. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, this is our get order. For create order, as we can see, create order is like slash customer slash, this one is path parameter and this is order. As you can see that over here, API endpoint is like slash customer slash customer ID 1, and the order is a resource, order resource name. And over here we have two basically input variables. First is path parameter, which is customer ID. Second is request body, order which we need to be created. So for order we have this model. These attributes need to be given to basically to create an order. And to delete a particular order, we would use uh, to access, we have used this API. For delete also we would use the same API endpoint, but the method would be delete. Okay. And also we have in this also we have two path parameter variables like customer ID and order ID. So as you can
No.
see, yeah. So as you can see, I mean, this is customer is a resource. Okay. And this curly braces indicates that this is a path parameter. Okay.
Yes.
And if you want to read that, then this the name of like this customer ID and this at the rate path variable should be same. Let's say if over here, let's say if you have given like ID, so over here also you should give ID only. Okay. We will go deep into that. So for delete also we use same API endpoint, but the HTTP method would be delete. Okay. And also we have over here we have two path variables. So customer ID and order ID would be taken. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so it's like as we saw, I mean, if we want to create a sub resource, let's say over here order is a sub resource of customer. So basically we should provide the customer ID as a path parameter, and the order details like a request payload should be given, and it would create an order for customer ID 1, and the response would be a status 200. Okay. So I mean, to summarize this, what are post URIs? So let's say post URIs can have path parameter. I mean, it is not compulsory thing. Like over here, like let's say slash customer, if we want to create only customer, then there was no path parameter. But let's say when we were creating that order, we required that path parameter, right? So I mean, it is possible to use path parameter in post URIs, but it is not mandatory. Okay. I mean, query parameters are not allowed in post URIs. It is allowed in get URIs. And I mean, whenever we want to create a resource, we should always have a request payload, because I mean, if we want to create a resource, then we should always provide that information to a server. Then next method is HTTP get method. Okay. HTTP get method we use to basically get a resource or get some data from server, and it is very widely used HTTP method. I mean, let's say if you log in into your LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. So you get those tweets or those information from LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. So those are response of that get methods only. So each API, like let's say slash tweets API is there, so it would basically fetch all the tweets for your timeline. So these are like one of the most heavily used HTTP method. So you always can have path parameter. I mean, let's say if you want to resource, if you want to view a particular resource, let's say if you want to view customer ID 111, so path parameter is compulsory. But if you want to view all the customer, then path parameter is not required at all. Okay. And obviously we don't require a request body, right? We are not creating any resource in this method. So obviously request bodies are unwanted for this. And if you want to fetch a single resource, then path parameter is mandatory to point to that specific resource. And if you want to like view multiple resources, then path parameter is not required. So as we can see, if you want to fetch customer ID 1, you would give API like slash customer slash 1, and it would give a response body that ID 1 is this, and the HTTP status code is 200. Okay, that the request has been served and there is no issues. Okay. But over here we have fetched only a single customer with ID 1. So over here path parameter is mandatory. Okay. But let's say, what if we want to view all the customers? Okay. So to view all the customers, we would remove that path parameter. We would what we want to which resource we want to access? Customer. So we would give that resource name slash customer, and it would fetch all the customers from that system. Okay. And the HTTP response code would be 200. Okay. Yeah. But let's say if you want to let's say view some tweets. I mean, there are millions and billions of tweets. So just assume that if you have login from your mobile or your desktop, and the Twitter server sends all the million records to your phone would be dead. And also, the transferring that huge amount of data to client is also, time consuming and all. So for that, we use a concept of pagination. Okay. Pagination, it is used in every system. If you talk about like a Gmail or Google, Facebook, Twitter, and then any other website which is developed by some big organization, it always use pagination. Because we a customer would only view few records. It would not view billions and millions of records, right? So to basically transfer all the data which is not required is time consuming, and also it would basically degrade our performance, and the client would be dead. Let's say even if somehow we have transferred all those data from server, and to view that 1 million records, our mobile would be dead. So for that we use a pagination. So pagination is like, let's say, yeah, it's like, let's say we want to view first 10 customers or first 10 tweets. So our pagination size should be 10. And let's say if we want to view next set of customers, then we have limit and offset kind of thing, which we will see further. So yeah. So let's say if we want to fetch first 10 customers, then we have said that limit equal to 10. But right. But let's say if some malicious user enters limit equal to 1 million. Okay. So our API should be smart enough to should not send 1 million. This limit should be implemented at API endpoint or at backend of the server. And let's say if and let's say our in our API specification we said that maximum limit can be, let's say, 100. And let's say our user says that limit equal to 1 million. So when the request comes to server, it would only give 100 records only, because it has in API documentation it has already given a specification that it can give maximum 100 records at a time. And let's say as we if our user says that it wants to view only 10 records, so yes, it would basically fetch 10 records. So the number of records are like minimum of whatever requested by client, and whatever we have specified in our backend. So minimum of those records would be sent. But let's say if we want to fetch next set of customer, let's say first 10 we have viewed, next set of customers, so we can use a offset kind of thing. So this is a example of a query parameter. Like parameter looks like that question mark limit equal to 10 means parameter is like we want this limit to be 10, only first 10 customers. And let's say we want only first 10 customers, then offset is 0 and limit is 10. So offset indicates like from where to start. But let's say first 10 we have read, okay, but we want to fetch next 10 set of customers, okay. So over here limit would be 10, our offset would be, let's say, from 10th or 11. For 11 to 20 it would return. And if we want to fetch, let's say, a customer from 100 to 110, so our offset would be like 100 and limit would be 10. So from 100 to 110 the server would respond those customers, okay. So this is query parameter, okay. So let's say let's say we want to access only a subset of customer, like let's say all the customers which are living in state MP, okay. So I mean we want to view the customer resource. So the API endpoint would be slash customer, and the filtering criteria is like state is equal to MP. So filtering criteria is also known as query parameter in this context. So all the customer records which are which are having state is equal to MP, it would return all those results. But let's say in a large social network sites like Facebook and Amazon, Facebook and Twitter and all, in MP only they would have, let's say, 1 lakh or 2 lakh users, okay. So it is not good way to return all those records. So in if let's say response is huge, then we should always use limit and filtering and all. So basically let's say we would first send first 10 set of customer, then next 10 set of customer and all. So it would basically reduce overall workload also, and the response time is also less. So the client would get a quick response from a server. So let's say if you want to yeah, there is another possibility, like it is not let's say over here we have defined only one only one query parameter. But there is a possibility that, let's say, we want in that also we want, let's say, a name to be, let's say, some XYZ. So if you want to add another query parameter or filtering criteria, then we can do this by adding and then name equal to, let's say, ABC. So all the customers which are having name ABC and state MP would return. So multiple query parameters are also possible. Like in case of path parameters, we had multiple path parameter. Query parameter is multiple query parameters are also possible. Yeah. And if we want to view sub resources, so over here, but let's say if we want to fetch all the orders from our our customer one, so what we want to fetch order, so that resource is orders. And for customer one, so So first customer is the resource is customer, and the ID is one. So this would basically fetch all the orders of customer one. Okay. And obviously, if let's say, if the response is huge, then obviously we can use some pagination and all, and filtering and all. So basically, to limit the response size. Yeah. So what is meant by idempotent? Okay. So let's first go. To our postman and basically view the data, whatever we have created. So let's say we want to view customer one. So let's say customer slash customer slash ID one. So as we can say, Sachin at the rate gmail.com. But let's say we want to view customer ID 2. Okay. Customer ID 2 is written. Let's say we want to view customer 3. As you can see, customer ID 3 does not exist. So error is customer ID 3 is not found. But uh, in this HTTP status code is 404, saying that not found. The resource requested is not found at server. Okay. So this the proper HTTP status code is mandatory over here. And let's say if we when enter some invalid ID, as we have saw that, all those customer IDs are like integer format only. But let's say if we give something like this, obviously the bad request, because client has given a wrong information, right? So HTTP status code would be 400 bad request, and the error would be like customer ID whatever is invalid. Okay. So let's say, if you want to again view the customer, yeah, we can view it. Okay. And let's say over here we have viewed only a particular customer, let's say one customer at a time. But let's say we want to view all the customers, okay, at once. So we would use slash customer, and we have not defined any path parameter, because we want to fetch all the customers. So as you can see, these are all the customers which exist in our system. Okay. Well, and let's say we want to get an order of that customer. So as you can see, the order 1001. But let's say if we define something like this, order does not exist. Okay. Let's say if you want to view 1002, then order 1002 is, we have like chair and all. And let's say if we want to view all the orders of that customer one, then our API endpoint would be slash customer slash ID1, and the resource is orders. So as you can see, there are three orders which has been placed by customer ID one. Okay. First is chair, second is also chair, and third is laptop. Okay. So there is a chance that, if we want to view only one resource, then path parameter is mandatory. If we want to use multiple resources, then path parameter is not required. Okay. And obviously, let's say if we want to view only a subset of customer, let's say state equal to MP. So you see that only if you see all the records which has state MP, right? No other records are sent. But if you view all the customers, there are other, like MP, then Maharashtra state is also there, UP state is also there. So in case of this filtering, this is a query parameter like state equal to MP. So all the customer records which have the state MP would be returned. Okay. And similarly for pagination, we would do like limit equal to 10 and offset equal to 0. So it would basically fetch first 10 customers. But let's say if we want to fetch next set of customers, we would give like offset equal to 10 and the limit is 10. So it would fetch all next 10 set of customers. So the one point over here to remember is that, I mean, if our ID is we can sort in ascending order, then only we would be able to do this. Yeah. So what is idempotency? Let's say if we hit API endpoint, get API endpoint multiple times, I mean, we would get the same resource. And idempotency means, I mean, let's say if we do that same operation multiple times, we should get the same result. So what is meant by that? Let's say if we want to view customer one, let's say I have get this, we got these details. Let's say second time also we are fetching same details, third time, fourth time, fifth time, I mean any time, I mean any number of time, if I am calling this API endpoint, get API endpoint, I'll be getting the same response. Okay, but let's say for create customer, I mean, let's say first is like, let's say Sachin 1 2 3. Okay, first time we have created a customer, there is no issue. But second time we are trying to create a customer with the same record, it is giving conflict response. So means, I mean, if we do a post operation multiple times, it I mean, it is giving a different result each time. Okay, first time it has created a customer, second time it has thrown an error like customer ID already exists. So over here, we can say get method is idempotent, because if we access get API endpoint multiple times, it would return the same result as we saw that. Okay, but in case of post method, it is not idempotent, because if we access that API endpoint multiple times, it would give conflict response. Like first time it would create a resource or customer would be created, second time it would throw an error saying that customer ID already exists. Okay. Yeah. So what is meant by put and what is meant by patch? So put and patch both are used to basically update the resource. But what is the difference between those? I mean, if if both are doing the same work, then why to keep? I mean, why? I mean, we should keep only one only, right? But I mean, depending on your needs, we should use put or patch. So put is, I mean, also used when uh, let's say if we want an upsert operation. Like upsert means, let's say if the data does not exist, then we would insert that resource or create that resource. And if data exists, then we would basically update that resource. So this operation is known as upsert. So put is basically used to create the resource if it does not exist, and if it exists, then it would update the resource. And obviously for create or update a resource, we would require a request body, right, which needs to be updated. And obviously to update that resource, we would require ID basically to, I mean, let's say if we want to update a customer or order, we would require that ID from a client to basically point to which uh, uh, which resource which needs to be updated. So as we can see, and this paradigm like upsert operation is only useful when when server can trust the ID provided by client. Okay, so I mean, as a part of request payload, we should always send, in case of put, we should always send ID from a client. Okay, in the request payload. If let's say that as you can see, let's say a client makes a request with ID in the payload, if the resource with that ID exists, then it would update that resource. Otherwise it would create a new resource. Let's say if that resource does not exist on the server, then it would create a new resource. So there are basically two ways to do that put operation also. I mean, first is to basically provide that ID in path parameter, as a path parameter input method. And second is to basically provide that ID in request payload. So in case of path parameter, let's say if we want to update um, ID1, then we would basically, if the ID exists, then it would update. Otherwise, let's say if ID does not exist, then it would throw an exception like not found, that customer ID not found. And let's say over here we are basically we want to update a customer ID too, so we would update that. And obviously, as we can see that let's say if a customer ID2 does not exist, then 404 not found would be thrown. And obviously when we are trying to update any resource or update any data, if let's say that data is in invalid format, then obviously our API should handle that I mean, it should throw a bad request that in this case, like if let's say that email ID is invalid, so invalid email ID should be thrown, and the HTTP status code would be 400 bad request. And this is how this our this was the first way, like we had provided the ID in our path parameter. But let's say if we provide that in our as a part of request payload, so let's say if everything is good, then it would basically update that resource. Otherwise, let's say if there is something which needs to be correct, so it would throw an appropriate response to a client. And yeah, so this was all about put method. So as we saw that, I mean, in case of put method, I mean, we have to basically pass all the parameters. But let's say, I mean, this is a very small case, but let's say in real world we would be having, let's say 50 or 100 attributes, and let's say we want to just change only a mobile number. So I mean, it's not feasible to send all the 100 attributes just to update one, right? In case of put method, we should always I mean, put method accept that all attributes is provide needs to be provided in the request payload. But over here, let's say we want to update only few attributes. So in this in case of put method, there will be a lot of bandwidth would be wasted to, I mean, basically transfer all the other 98 attributes which we do not require to update. So patch, in that case, patch method is useful. I mean, whatever let's say we want to update only state and country of that customer ID, we would send only that uh, that customer ID, that detail only which needs to be updated, and it would basically update that information. Okay. And in I mean, in context of idempotency, put and patch is always idempotent, because I mean, let's say if we are trying to basically update the, let's say state of customer ID to mh every time, I mean, that mh record will be I mean, the state would be updated to mh only. Okay, so let's go into, yeah, so let's go into our put and patch. So let's say put, let's say if we want to update our 9, we want to update mobile number, so we have provided this put, and the ID is 1. So as we can see, the ID is updated. So let's check that whether our customer ID 1, the mobile number is changed or not. Earlier we had the mobile number is like 123, now we have changed that, right? So yeah, as you can see that, I mean, the phone number is updated for customer 1. Okay. Now let's say if we try to update with path parameter. So let's say again we change that to, let's say our mobile we are changing it to, let's say this the- again, as you can see that our resource is updated, and if we want to get that resource, as you can see, the resource has been updated. But let's say, our while updating the resource, customer has given like this. As you can see, I mean, the server has responded with paired request, that I mean client said there is an issue in email ID. Okay. And let's say, I mean, let's say user wants to access, update a customer ID 100. So obviously customer ID 100 does not exist in our system. So a server responds with 404 not found. Okay. So as we saw, I mean, in case of put method, we can update the resource, but provided all the details are, given in the request payload. But let's say if we want to update only, let's say, state of this customer ID one. So current state is Maharashtra. So let's say I want to update it to, let's say, MH. Okay. So yeah, as you can see, only these details are required. Let's say state, now let's say, IND we are saying. So as you can see, that state is updated to MH, current country is IND. And let's say if we fetch that, yeah, then the resource has been updated successfully. Okay. So yeah, the main difference is like, in case of put method, everything needs to be sent, like as you can see, all the details needs to be sent. But I mean, and let's say if we require, only one attributes to be updated, so this is not a good method to be used. We should always use patch method, because only the those attributes which needs to be updated are passed in this request payload. So this is, yeah. Now let's go into our next section. Yeah. So HTTP delete method. So basically, if this HTTP delete method is used if we want to delete that resource from our system. Okay. And obviously, let's say if we want to access the customer ID one, so we use slash customer slash one. So if we want to delete the customer ID one, then our API endpoint would be same, like slash customer slash one, but the HTTP method would be delete. Okay. And obviously no request payload is required, because I mean, ID itself can point to uniquely identify that record in on our system. So basically, let's say whenever we are trying to delete a customer ID one, we would basically get like that customer ID is deleted. If it is deleted, and let's say if there is a chance that customer ID does not exist, then it would throw an error that four not found. And obviously, in case of idempotency, I mean, delete is not idempotent. Let's say we delete a customer ID one, so first time it would delete, but let's say again the client requests the same API endpoint, like customer ID one we want to delete, so next time it would throw that that customer ID one does not exist. Okay. As you can see, first time we tried to delete, it says that customer ID is deleted. But when again we are trying to delete the customer, it says that customer ID not found, with status code 404, that customer ID is not found. So let's go into, yeah, delete method. Let's say first we have deleted it, then again let's say we are trying to delete it. So I mean, since the customer ID one is already deleted, so server checks, I mean, the customer ID does not exist, so it throws an error, and the HTTP status code is that 404 not found. Okay. Again, let's say if user provides some invalid information, so obviously it should not hit that our database only. At a service layer only, we use some business policies and all. So basically, we have certain types of check at service layer only to basically validate those requests. So since ID1 is already deleted, let's say we want to delete ID2. So now it is deleted because customer ID 2 was there. But let's say again, if you want to delete it, then it says that 404 not found, that customer ID 2 does not exist now. Okay. And filtering and pagination, again, I mean, because if you see, majority of our data in all the social network sites, or anywhere you go on internet, all those data we get is from the get APIs. And let's say if you scroll through any job search website like LinkedIn, Indeed, or Naukri.com, you might see that, there are lot of job openings that is available. And let's say if all this data is sent to our UI, or the devices that we are using to browse it, then what would happen? I mean, obviously this would, I mean, our system would crash. And if we see, like a LinkedIn session, a LinkedIn job opening section, it has, like lakhs and lakhs of job openings. I mean, and obviously as a user, we don't want to access all those job openings at once. So let's say might want to maybe search for a job. So let's say, say for a front end developer or a back end developer. And you may be, we can basically, as you can see this in this screenshot, let's say I have searched for this software engineer position, and location is India. So as you can see that these are provided as query parameters, because these are like a filtering criteria only. I mean, job description which has software engineer, and the work location is India, only those, sorry, only those job openings would be shown. But let's say, I mean, as you can see, there are a lot of openings, like around 98,000 results. Okay. So obviously, I mean, let's say if LinkedIn has sent those all records on my desktop, then I mean, my desktop would have been gone, right? So obviously the LinkedIn had done pagination, like only first 10 set of records would be sent. And let's say if I want to view the other set of records, then I would click on page 2, then page 3, then page 4, and all. So this works in limit and offset way. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, then the last section of our presentation. So this is asynchronous API. Currently, I mean, whatever till now, whatever we have discussed, right? Whatever what we can say, APIs which we have discussed, those are synchronous. I mean, let's say, when we, just one sec, when let's say I hit this API, my postman is waiting for a response. So this is called a synchronous way of communication. Like when whenever we are hitting that API, we are waiting for response. So basically this is synchronous. But l- b- let's say what happens when you want to send particular API to basically, you know I mean, let's say if we want to view the data, I mean, as you can see, we got that in 27 milliseconds. Okay. I mean, the request response is pretty fast, right? But let's say if we want to, what happens when we try to upload quite a big file, let's say, in terms of GBs, like let's say if you want to upload a file of, let's say, 100 GB or 10 GB. I mean, obviously, this synchronous way would not be possible, right? So over here, like what we can do is like, when we want to execute any time consuming operations, we should always do in asynchronous way. So let's say whenever a request is made from client to a server, basically server gives a response, and in the response it gives a token, right? Token, or we can say ID. So it indicates that the request has been accepted by server. And let's say whenever and the ID of that resource is this. So in the response, it would basically give a token. And let's say whenever let's say if you want to check the status of that that resource, let's say file upload operation, so client can basically use that token ID to view the status of that file upload operation. So as we can see, let's say client makes a file upload request, server responds with, let's say, 200 and okay. So it says that yes, your request has been accepted, and this is ID, let's say F1234 is our ID or token. And let's say so client knows that yeah, now my request has been accepted, and the client can do any other operation. But let's say after some time it wants to access the status of that file upload operation, whether that file upload is successful or terminated or incomplete or in progress, whatever. So I mean, let's say if it wants to access that status, so the API endpoint would be slash file slash this ID, and that is given by server F123 and slash status. So I mean, depending on the status, the server would respond like whether it is completed or failed or in progress. So I mean, depending on the status, I mean, client would know that yes, my file upload is successful or it is currently in progress or failed and on. So yeah, this was so yeah. To recap this, I mean, the rest is architectural style, and it uses underlying HTTP methods like get, post, put, patch, or delete to basically access or modify those resources. And we also saw various HTTP status codes like 1xx like informational, 2xx like success, then 4xx like client side errors, 5xx like server side errors. And we also saw what is difference between path parameter and query parameter, and when to use it. So I mean, path parameter can be used in both in get and post, but query parameter should be only used in get method only. And one of the most important topic also, like filtering pagination, like if we want to you know implement any large scale system, we should always implement the filtering and pagination mechanism, because we don't want to overwhelm the client or a server with a burden of sending all the records at once. So we chop off the data in form of pages, and only send the subset of data. Okay. Then we also saw what is synchronous versus asynchronous APIs, and when to use synchronous and when to use asynchronous, and all what are the use cases of that. And so, I mean, most of the APIs are synchronous in nature. I mean, like creating a resource and all. But let's say if there is any operation which is taking more time, it's basically we should develop that in asynchronous API. And I mean, all the generally used service API, like any book ordering system, or Amazon or Facebook or anything. I mean, any large scale system be that are basically developed in REST based architecture only. So I mean, they are like for each resource, each functionality, they would have some resource and all. So all these search services and all, they are basically implemented in REST based services only. So I think that's it from my side. We can go in detail about like different HTTP status codes. Like these are like status code like bad request 400, and let's say that if it is the client is unauthorized to view those, then the server would respond to 401. So I mean, appropriate HTTP response should be sent by a server to basically uh, show the client that what was the error and all. So yeah, that was it from my side.
Yeah, so you mentioned that the server responses have to be defined here. Um, so do we have to make sure that every time we develop a project, we have to definitely add the HTTP status class to our project?
No, no, it's part of this what you can say, a Spring framework only.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
The other validations that you had mentioned, say for example, like issues with like the params that are being sent. So for example, you don't put an at the rate in an email address, or you send a character in a
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you got your point. So
yeah. So
these are business requirements, right? So let's
yeah.
say if let's say okay, we want to create a customer. While creating a customer, we would pass a customer record. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so it would, so we have a business policy like validate email. Okay, so I
Mhm.
mean it's a completely a business choice. Okay, I mean we don't want to go I mean to database to check whether this email is valid or not. I mean obviously, let's say if someone intends to bring down your system, then they would bombard with invalid requests. And let's say if you have not developed a system properly and you have not done a proper validation, then
Uh-huh.
your system would be gone, right? So this is, I mean, it's your business requirement. I mean, over here I have used standard email regex, but I mean, let's say your organization wants that email ID should be of at least this much length or that much length. I
Mhm.
mean, so you can obviously incorporate that also. I mean, the best example is like, let's say in logging system, like
Mhm.
let's say for password cases, password. So I mean, few organization want that I mean the password should contain the uppercase, lowercase, and then at the rate, I mean special symbols and the numbers. It's combination of those. So I mean those are implemented at business policy layer. Like let's say at server, whenever the request comes to service from controller, so first we validate that. Let's say if our this email ID is not valid, right? So
Mhm.
we would throw that customer ID, customer invalid exception. And as I already told that, I mean we should always use our own exceptions. I mean, let's say if we had thrown like throw new exception, so I mean client would not be aware what is what went wrong. Okay, why put should always be idempotent. I mean, but in general, yes, I mean put is idempotent because I mean, let's say idempotency means what? I mean, let's say a result of let's say if you want to do some update. Let's say you want to uh, update the customer state to, let's say, from Maharashtra to, let's say, MP. So if you do it multiple times, the result of that would remain same only. I mean your what you can say, your uh, the resource would have the status MP only. But so I mean in that sense, yes, put should be always idempotent. But I mean it depends on your system requirement also. Like let's say if you have some locking mechanism, like let's say if customer has updated, let's say, his name or address, then it cannot update for, let's say, next 30 days. So in that case, that put request would not be idempotent. Okay, I hope I have clarified your question. Sometimes we get error like this, email ID used by other customer. That could be a part of email validation. No, this I mean this I mean the basic validation is done at service layer. Sometimes we get error like this email ID used by other customer. So obviously, I mean, to know that, we would require to use the DB. I mean, to see which all users are part of the system. So obviously this would not be done at service layer. So basically service layer would call third party API, or maybe it would call a DB to check whether this email ID already exists or not. If it already exists, then it would throw an error. Otherwise it would process that. How data in tabular form is converted to into JSON format? I mean, it's when you read from DB. So I mean, obviously you need some model are like this. So let me yeah. So let's say address or customer. Let's say. So obviously, I mean, so at DAO layer, at data access object layer, let's say you have yeah, let's say your DB is like this. Let's say ID num, your DB's columns are like this. id num, let's say name, email, id. Okay, let's say these three columns. But your this pojo class or model class is like this: id, name, and email, like this. So which column this id number maps to this id. I mean, we need a mapper, like whenever we access that a resource or that row from a table, we would get this column and set it in our id, and the name would be set in our name, and then email id value would be set in our email. So these are these are called conversions, and it is mostly done in DAO layer mapping. So basically, when your database objects are mapped to your model. We can use post for getting data if query string get to. I mean, we can do anything. Let's say your controller is like this, okay, and you have, let's say this is your get customer, okay, and your API endpoint is like this, and the method is HTTP get, and let's say over here I call like instead of get I call like customer service dot delete. Obviously we can do that, but is this a correct way of implementing? I mean, when you are saying that there are certain standard templates which needs to be followed. I mean, obviously we can do that, but it is not recommended. Okay, thanks for joining. I'm dropping off. Bye.